Welcome to Marketing Demystified, the podcast that connects the dots for business leaders to drive revenue through effective marketing strategy. We chat with marketing experts on different topics that will help you ramp up your revenue. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platforms. Marketing Demystified, the podcast, is presented to you by GrowGetter, your partner in growth marketing. And here's today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Are you ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered with actionable tips to transform your marketing game? You're in the right place. Welcome to Marketing Demystified. I'm your host, Jenn Mancusi, CEO and co-founder of GrowGetter, your growth marketing partner. To grow your business, brand really matters. But how do we ensure you're doing the sort of brand building that actually is going to drive growth for your company? To discuss this topic, I'm excited today to be joined by Jesse Purewal, currently VP of Corporate Marketing and Brand at PagerDuty, previously head of brand at Qualtrics and partner at Profit. Welcome to the show, Jesse.
It is my pleasure to be with you, Jen. How are you this Monday?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm really happy to have you on the show today. I've always been a fan of your work, as you know, and I'm excited to dig into your expertise a little bit.
Well, the fandom goes both ways, so thanks for having me, and yeah, excited to dig in.
Awesome. Appreciate that. Well, let's get started. I want to hear, why you think branding is so critical for a company's growth and how it can directly impact the bottom line ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think first it helps to get on common ground with just the definition of what is brand, right? And I think if we can agree, and we can debate too, but I like to think of brand as sort of the sum total of all the experiences that a consumer or a customer, a human being has with an organization, with a company, and the place that those experiences have in our minds and hearts. So, back in the day, you could argue maybe a brand was what it said it was. Pepsi is the choice of new generation. Coke is it. Whatever. The messaging would come out, and it was like, oh, that's the brand. Now, since so much more runs on customer empathy and understanding unmet needs and trying to fill a niche in somebody's life in probably a really competitive and challenging market, you've got to just be really, really customer driven. And I think the job of a brand is to be relentlessly relevant, always relevant as customer needs change, as category dynamics change, as company capabilities change. And the clarity of the story that you have to tell is what's going to determine the safety of your path to revenue. Like in B2B, where I play, like how does what the company offer solve an important, significant, challenging business issue? Like that's the direct line to growth. In order to tell the story around what the company does, how its innovation is relevant, like the story has to make sense. And the brand tells that story at any place along that experience line, whether it's a post on social, whether it's, the first 5 minutes of the opening to the meeting, like why are we here? If it's a sales pitch. So if you can cut through the clutter, you can be clear about the pain that you want to solve or that you need to address for a buyer, for a customer, speak their language, make it clear that you've got bona fide innovation that they ought to bet their reputation and their revenue on, like then you're going to win. And so the through line from brand to growth is in effect that it's this declaration of shared interest. You've got a problem. I've got a solution. Let's talk.
There's so much to react to in what you've just said. That was, I think, what really came through to me from when you first started talking was about the consistency, right, across all of the different experiences. Like that, like what I heard you say, maybe too simplified, is like the brand is not the product. The brand isn't what you say one time in an ad and a tagline. It's not that one message like you were describing, like Coca-Cola or whatever, Pepsi. it's the consistency of all of that stuff across every message and every product interaction and every, like you describe, experience throughout the business. And that's actually really challenging to create that sort of consistency. And then the other thing you said that really hit me is this concept of relentless. I wrote it down: relentlessly relevant, and being able to not only maintain consistency, but also adaptability and the ability to change that. Like, how does those two things work together, where you're having to be relevant in the moment and be able to adapt to the market and to the changes that are happening, and also maintain that internal consistency so that experience is maintained across all those different touch points that customers have those experiences with you.
So this is the great privilege of being able to steward brand within a marketing organization. No matter what part of the organization is being asked to deliver work, whether it's the campaigns team, whether it's the content team, events, heck, even marketing ops, there is always going to be, if you have a well-calibrated leadership team and you have a deeply empathetic company, and you're doing things the way you should do to steward the customer that you're trying to win with, there will always be the call to action of like, how are we making sure what we do with this campaign and that audience, this campaign, this audience, this event, this is consistent. And the way that you get there is through the single-minded, purpose-driven architecture of the brand. It comes back to, why do we exist? What do we believe? And how do we pay that off? And so you get consistency because it's almost like, when you're playing like tag or capture the flag, or whatever, and at some point you have to like go back and touch home base. Every person in marketing has to come back and touch home base with the brand, whether they're building content, they're setting up a booth at an event, they're thinking of a theme for a campaign, they're setting up a customer meeting. You always have to think through, how does this come back to the story that we are trying to tell? So to make that real for a second, at PagerDuty, we talk about transforming operations. We talk about transforming digital operations in service of growth and broader business transformation. And we always come back to, how is this moment, this content, this experience going to pay off on that big idea of operational transformation for our CIO or our chief digital officer or CTO kind of audience. So you just have to have that touchstone, and you just have to be willing to go back to it and get your content, get your work, get your artifact, get your experience to where it's dialed around like that center of excellence. And then on the flip side, staying adaptable, like the way that I believe you stay adaptable is you just stay in touch with customer needs. And, there's tried and true ways of doing this that go back many, many decades, like the sales team and, those that are spending lots of time with customers should be reflecting back the feedback that they hear. And then marketing should be standing up ways to do customer insight at scale and deeply understand, like, what are the drivers of consideration and purchase in this category? Like, what are the brands whose innovation agendas are being deeply respected, and why? What are the big money problems that people are putting dollars to that they have challenges addressing? And how can you go address those problems? So you stay adaptable by kind of flexing as the customer needs grow, change, evolve. And you stay consistent by like anchoring back to that purpose, back to that why, and making sure that all the things that you go put out into the market somehow are an expression of that.
I love that analogy of like playing tag or whatever, capture the flag, going back to home base. It's very easy for me to understand. And I think all of our audience will be thrilled to hear the shout out for customer insights being at the center of this work.
It actually
right?
it's actually been slightly unnerving for me to see since coming out of Profit, where we stewarded, the voice of the customer through deep analytics, rich qualitative kinds of insight generation, to see how hard it can sometimes be to make the case for investing in voice of the customer at scale. Now, we have access as a software company, we have a lot of access to a lot of really rich customer data. I mean, we have account level data. We have data from our website. We have tons of information around how our product is used. And of course, we have behavioral data based on all the tracking that we do through our MarTech stack. But that doesn't equate to looking around the corner. And I feel what a brand team or whoever in your organization is owning the insights team, what you're really doing there is, in a sense, trying to see the future. You're trying to see around the corners and go, where might we be vulnerable to this upstart competitor that we don't regard as a deep threat today? Where might we be underwhelming in our messaging and have some false positives around how well it's resonating because we don't know, we haven't tested something else. And I think sometimes people will equate doing surveys with something that sounds like it was, old technology, when in fact, actually, doing a 5-10 minute survey, like a couple times a quarter to stay on pulse with some major trends and feelings and opinions and thoughts of your customers, because of the way you can analyze that data at scale right now, using LLMs and using AI technology, like it actually turns out this is a moment to actually interrogate some of what historically were considered, over the past few years got considered like maybe an old way of doing research, like reigniting some of those methodologies, but just being able to do them in a faster cycle, leveraging automation and AI to get to the insights and actions a lot faster than you used to be able to do when you had to run everything through, SPSS and some of those older software kits.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there is still maybe that feeling of like, well, if we pause to do the research, it's going to delay the thing that we want to do, right? Where, it doesn't have to, and it can be iterative, and, that concept of continuous learning is so important. So even
I
what you
never
said,
had my
5
CMO
minutes
or
once a quarter.
I never had my CMO or my CEO tell me that we had gathered too much customer insight. I'll just say it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's totally true. Well, I mean, that's maybe a good segue. Like, what are some of the common mistakes that companies are making when thinking about brand building and brand strategy? Maybe, not enough customer insights could be one of them, but what else?
Yeah, that's definitely one of them. I think on another, I would talk about this idea of shared interest, and I think a great brand is about shared interest. What I mean by that is through messaging, through visual identity, voice and tone, experience, the kind of product that you put your name on, like in all these ways, brand signals what a company believes and why it exists and why it's worth investing your dollars. And if you're in B2B, investing your reputation and your career in. I think where brand builders, where marketers will sometimes go wrong is not recognizing that shared interest and just trying to make things more inside out, right? Here are the new features. Here's the thing we need to drive SEO around. Here's the competitive takeout that we need to write our narrative to address. Here's the competitor that we need to go best at this event so that we, set up our theme in a certain way. We have to emphasize price because we've got so many days left in the quarter and we've got to, close a certain number of deals. And while all that stuff has a place, I think if you over rotate on talking about the company, talking about the product, talking about the features, and don't open the door or step into the conversation through customer need and customer pain, it's hard. It's hard. I would even say, we're in the process of doing that in a more mature way right now. We're about to launch a campaign for PagerDuty that's going to have a very emotional need at the middle of it, and it's going to invite customers to see PagerDuty as indispensable infrastructure and an indispensable platform for solving some really complicated issues that took many, many years to get wrong, but that we can help them get right very, very quickly. that's a pivot from talking about like all these things that PagerDuty can do. Like we even have some advertising, in out of home and digital right now that's talking about PagerDuty does all that, and speaking about all the things that are part of our platform, which we had an awareness gap to address in terms of some of our capabilities. So that was a strategic move for us, but it's en route to getting more disciplined around how do we lead with customer need and then work back in the customer journey. Oh, big headline messages around this pain that I feel. Okay, here's a relevant solution or brand I should consider. I'm going to click and learn more. And then by that next click in, now I'm reading content about the solution, about the product. So just steward that customer journey, start with the customer pain, and go from there. That's honestly the big thing. Recognize that you are in a shared interest relationship with your customers, and just be super curious about like what they're struggling with and how you can help.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And what you kind of touched on it just for a second, this focusing on capabilities when there's an awareness gap about capabilities, and then focusing on actually maybe more benefit driven or aspirational type messaging once, I guess, when do you recommend one versus the other, or is it constantly working together as part of the journey?
I mean, for me in B2B, it's just always start with what is the customer challenge to be solved.
Yeah.
Now that might or might not have what any given person would consider to be an emotional call to action. But there's enough research that I've been persuaded by that suggests that the emotional call in B2B actually matters even more than in consumer. If you think about heads of IT, heads of finance, heads of marketing, anyone who's in an executive role is betting at least a part of their reputation and their success on any individual or any group of partners, platforms, technologies, vendors that are coming to them saying, we've got what you need. And, not to be overly dramatic about it, but if it's, okay, should I try this takeout or that takeout? My reputation with my wife is not going to take a huge hit if I get the wrong pizza. Like, we'll make it right next time.
Yeah.
But if I sign up for partner X on a 3-year deal to activate some capability within my data center versus Y, that road not taken, I'll never know how it went. And so I've got to be super persuaded that X is the right route for me and for my business and for all the outcomes that we need to drive. And so for that reason, there's just more of this idea of peace of mind and trust at the center of everything in a B2B buyer than there often is in consumer. Now, of course, there are exceptions, right? We're talking about things like safety, right? In an automobile or in food, or when we're talking about making a decision about a school, for example. And these are sort of almost one-way door type decisions.
Mm.
But I think every B2B purchase comes with a little bit of professional reputation associated with it. And so you have to be willing to go to that spot where you're going to be, in a sense, selling peace of mind more so than you're selling, software or infrastructure or applications.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the biggest differences between B2B and B2C is B2B, you're spending somebody else's money, and you often have to back that up with why you made that choice. And well, not if it goes well right away. If it goes well right away, then everybody's happy. But especially if there's any kind of thing that doesn't go as planned, you're right. It's your reputation on the line and your career potentially. And that's really important. But I also think that a lot of B2B companies out there that are thinking about brand are constantly in this like push and pull of like, well, we want to focus on benefits and customer needs and build that, emotional connection with our potential buyers, but we also need to tell them what we do. And so it's a hard kind of balance to strike of like, how do you create customer centric brand and messaging that also, oh, we're going to solve this biggest problem that you have, And then the question always becomes, well, how do you do that? And I think there's companies who can go too far in either direction of like, not enough about the capabilities that people don't actually know what the business does. That's not great. And then too far in the other direction where it's so saturated with content of every detail that it's too kind of inside out focus, like you mentioned.
Yeah. I mean, but I think the trick is that you have to bring your best Renaissance brain to the challenge.
Hmm.
Uh, and always look for the intersection between the handoff from that more emotional, higher order, outcome driven idea and the tactics that you pursue. And I'll talk about one example from my profit days. So we worked with one organization that was getting into the fray in the procurement industry of all industries,
Hmm.
and needed a way to differentiate from some of the core incumbents in that space. And we ignited a qualitative research stream, which is to say, we sat down with 25 or 30 heads of procurement from around the world in different enterprise and SMB organizations and just talked to them about how they were thinking about their critical success factors, their remit, their company trajectories, all the things that they wanted to achieve. And one of the overriding themes that came through was, look, everybody kind of assumes that just because we're in procurement, we just want to gatekeep and we want to say no and we want to stop things from happening and we want to get you to not buy that thing and we want to put the money back in the coffers. And they're like, it's not that. We just want to play our own role in digital transformation. Like we want to play the role of how do we stand up at speed and with scale processes that do the right thing, still, stewarding our capital, to your point about other people's money.
Hmm.
But we want to do that in a way that feels like it's ready for the next generation and for the modern digital business. Like we don't want to do procurement the way it was done 20 years ago. Like we want to lead the charge and we want to have a seat at the table for growth and transformation. And, that's a simplification of the overall idea, but it was really the core of it. And so when we built the brand strategy and brand messaging for this company, it was kind of around this idea of heroizing the procurement professional, heroizing that person who is, doing what is ultimately sometimes not seen as the most sexy work in the enterprise, right? But it has to get done. And so in a sense, by borderline venerating that role and those people and quite literally using photography and imagery and color and light to show them in an honorific way in the advertising and on the covers of decks that sales teams were using and in some of the stuff they were doing in demand gen and certainly at their corporate events, we just said, we are here to respect you and we're here to help you become ambassadors to growth and change and transformation in your enterprise, not just take 10% out of the business every year and you're done.
Mm.
And that worked really well. We had their attention, and we had their attention here and we had it here. And what was so important about that is then we had the ability to say, here's our offer, here's where we're going. And then they were looking at, all of here's the price sheets, here's the offer, here's the contract terms, all these, they're procurement people. Like they know how to buy. What they
Yeah.
needed to feel was that emotional stewardship, that kind of higher order idea of like, okay, why is this going to be different than some of the incumbents that I'm doing business with today?
That's such a great example of just how it kind of goes from like the brand can really drive that journey of problem to solution. And if you can capture their minds and their hearts first, you can tell them how you're going to do it later. But that you don't really need to give all the detail of who you are. I see a lot of companies lead with that, oh, our new explainer video, all about our company. But really it doesn't touch on what benefits they bring to their customers or how they're changing their day to day. And that's the important thing to see first. And then the other stuff can come later once you've captured their attention.
Yeah, that's right. And what could be more fun than like getting into the psychology of a human being, like a buyer archetype, and finding a way to deeply resonate with them, and in a sense, like giving them a bit of a platform, a bit of a pedestal to say, like, y'all are doing great work and this brand's for you, kind of a thing. Um, the more that you build a brand around that kind of customer respect and customer honor, the more elasticity you have as a company to get into adjacent areas. Like if you are known as the most trusted brand in your category, you will always be able to find success with new innovations that build beyond your core. And that makes it easier to expand more profitably. That makes it easier to experiment, to look around the corner and figure out what's coming next and get great feedback. And it makes it easier to keep competitors at bay. You know, the less of an emotional relationship you have with your customers, the harder it is to be persuasive over time that this next category you're going to get into, or this next thing you're going to acquire your way into, is going to be the right thing. Simply because you haven't put points on the board, haven't earned that trust, haven't demonstrated that credibility that maybe you could have if you'd gone a little bit more deep emotionally.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. All right. So let's talk about kind of maintaining brand as companies scale. Like, what are some of the strategies to, really maintain the integrity of brand as companies grow and new people come in, and really the businesses change in the same way that the environment that you're selling in is changing?
Yeah, I mean, no surprise. I would lead with, stay curious and stay customer driven. Um, if you don't have a ton of curiosity about like what is the business pain, what is the business challenge, what is the thing this person needs to go solve, or these folks in these roles, like then it's gonna be hard to scale. Because if you're not excited about continuing to solve the problems of the people that your business is stood up to help succeed, like I'm not sure what else you have. So you have to stay curious about customer needs and about customer psychology and about whether they're getting what they need from the category and what opportunities and areas there are. That's number one, and I think that's table stakes. I think in order to then do that, I think you have to widen the tent of who gets to spend time with customers. It's not just sales teams. It's not just certain folks from the marketing team or the exec team. I feel really strongly that product, marketing, people teams, HR teams, like need to be in these conversations with folks that are, quote unquote being called on. If it's a sales meeting and they're using you for product X and you want to pitch them on expanding to product Y, like you just explain to the customer, hey, we're having, so-and-so who recently joined our people team, or so-and-so who's in this role on the product team, going to join in and just listen in on the conversation. Is that okay? And 99 times out of 100, customers will say, yeah, like as long as like the people who are going to tell me what I need to know are here. And a lot of times customers say, oh, that's interesting. I've never seen that approach before. I've never seen sort of a company just bring folks along to hear the voice of the customer. That's really neat. And so then not only are you endowing a new person's brain in your company with customer sentiment, you're signaling to that customer that you're customer driven, which can't hurt. Now, you don't always have to be in the Zoom or be in the meeting. There are wonderful platforms for recording, and doing analytics on sales calls, interactions that are just top notch. And so please take advantage of those. Ask your head of revenue, ask your chief marketing officer about these platforms if you don't already have access to one of them, because they're terrific. And I'd also say, like, as you're scaling, like sharing your story and how it's evolving, not just externally on the LinkedIns of the world, but also internally. Like, write about the evolution of your brand on your blog and on your internal company wiki. Yes, put it on LinkedIn, of course, but maybe even more important, sharing it at your all hands, making the dozens or the hundreds or the thousands of people that work at your company like understand the story and where you're taking it and why. Most likely, if you've been in business for a couple of years, you're not the same company that you joined. And so everyone should be curious about, like, are we doing the same things that we were doing 36 months ago? Because that might not be tenable. And there should be a lot of curiosity in the company. Like, where are we taking the story? Where are we taking the narrative? We just acquired this company. We just came out with this feature. Like, how's the brand evolving? Like, channel curiosity that people have internally and scale every one of your people, in a sense, to be an ambassador of your brand. And it sounds little and it sounds trite, but doing stuff on the intranet, on your corporate Slack, like the Zoom backgrounds, the swag in the offices, I think all that stuff goes a long way to creating that consistency that we talked about at the top. When you got anybody who might utter a word about or get asked to give their pitch on, at a barbecue or, at a dinner or something like that, you just always want as many people that can tell a version of the story that's calibrated and it's right as possible. So starting with customer needs, really just remaining curious, and then just pulling that through to all employees around the company.
Yeah. I love what you said about like actually telling the story of the evolution of the brand, because there is sometimes this sense of like when there's, new positioning that's rolled out or new messaging or maybe a complete rebrand, that it's almost like, let's pretend the old one never happened and just erase every trace of it and move on. But there's something to be said for like, hey, we used to be this, but because we're a customer-centric organization and we're constantly trying to stay in touch with what our customers need, now we're talking about this in this different way. Like, that's such a powerful story that I think is often just like, oh, we're like, don't talk about the old branding, right? That was old and is no good anymore. But it's part of the story. And there's something that like any opportunity to kind of humanize a business, I think is really important. But that's such a great suggestion on a way to do that. And I think the other thing, like, it's such a simple tactic to invite other people to your meetings to shadow. Like, I've done programs where it's like, product needs to be speaking to one customer every week and marketing needs to be speaking to one customer every week. But they're like, interviews, feedback interviews that take time and they're difficult, we incentivize or whatever, right? And programs like that are very, very valuable and you learn a lot in those conversations. But just inviting people to shadow calls that are already on the calendar for customers that are tough to get time with, that's such a simple and easy way to do exactly what you described. Get the people internally thinking about customer needs and get the customers knowing that everybody at this business cares about you, not just me, your primary contact, which I think is just such a great tip.
Yeah. And if you can look, understanding it won't culturally work at every company to have people that aren't part of the revenue organization in on those calls. Like, whether you're using something like Gong or Outreach or ClickUp is another great one. I mean, I know Clary's doing more and more with customer analytics and off of recordings. The point is really to be able to immerse yourself in the actual experience of hearing the words of the customer. I mean, quite literally, like listening to the audio. And if English isn't your native language and it's recorded in English, like it translates. If you're trying to get to, I want to hear feedback firsthand, like on how this product is performing, or how this need is changing, that there's just no better way. You'd be surprised like how much your credibility within the organization will take a positive lift when you start using the voice of the customer and sharing facts that you've heard from. Now you gotta be careful. You can't just get an N of 1 or 2 and declare yourself an expert. But the context that you have that others then don't have, where you can get to decisions faster, you can get to better decisions, you can be asking even more interesting and engaging and relevant questions when people come to you for feedback. It's just a million multiplier effects of spending more time with the customer.
Yeah, so important. I love that this has kind of become the theme of the conversation. Like, customer has to be at the center of everything, brand growth, any strategy. And I think that's so important. What are some maybe early warning signs that, your brand isn't, maybe it's veering off course from the core identity, or maybe it's just not working anymore? Like, what are some ways that you can tell
Yeah,
that
the
some
warning
adjustments need
signs.
to be made?
Well, so continuing with our theme, it's if you hear customer feedback around, I don't know what you stand for. Um, I had no idea that you did that. Like
Mhm.
the kind of gap in that shared interest, like if that shared interest isn't a Venn diagram, if it starts to be like we're over here and customers over there, that's bad news. You want to stitch that together. Uh, Second one is back to the internal side. Like when you have really great people, great employees leaving, and you're learning in your exit conversations that part of the reason is because the brand and the values and the mission and the vision like doesn't deeply resonate with them. Like that's potentially something to watch out for. Now, not everybody's going to resonate with every brand's purpose, and that's like part of life and the part of the beautiful human mosaic that we have. But when you see great people departing, and part of the reason is just our why isn't really resonating with me, that's a problem. That's a red flag. And when you start seeing your marketing team me tooing, ripping off competitor language or stealing stuff, or taking
Mhm.
shortcuts that feel like they're not authentic to the brand or to the product, and you're sort of not doing things the right way, that's another flag that like we really need some help. So listen for what customers are saying, listen to what employees who have feedback for you are saying, and then look out for if it's starting to feel like, boy, what we're doing here feels like we're ticking boxes to get work done versus really being imaginative and strategic and thoughtful about it.
Yeah, it is important to like keep up with what your competitors are doing, or even just leaders in other industries, and to draw inspiration from. But yeah, if it's getting if you've got total rip off language coming out of your campaigns and your messaging, then maybe there's a disconnect between what you're uniquely qualified to offer to your customers and what they want to buy from you. So that's a really good one, and hopefully you've got a customer centric organization from the get go, so you will be hearing that feedback from customers. And I do hear that a lot, people saying, oh, I didn't know you did that, or oh, look, this company just launched this new feature, which is actually like their core functionality from day one, right? Like that there's a messaging challenge there if you're not educating your customers on um, all the ways that you can help them. So, how much flexibility do you think you can have with brand identity when you're trying to like maintain a certain uh, company values and kind of the core of who the company is? Like, how how creative can you get with brand?
Oh, well, I mean, I think it's back to our home base touchstone analogy from before. I think you can and do have nearly infinite flexibility in where you're taking creative and where you're taking expression and what you're doing with the brand identity. I think of it as the company's values, the company's purpose ought to be enduring. Those are things that maybe change every couple decades. Uh, the way that they are expressed ought to change over time. And so at PagerDuty, for example, we have a purpose that is giving teams the time and efficiency they need to build the future. And that's a fairly bedrock purpose. Like we're going to do things that allow them to move faster and them to work better so that they can go build their part of the future. Um, there's nothing about that we need to change. Like that's our company's reason for being. How we express that and all the things that we build on our innovation agenda and our roadmap, all the things we go do in marketing, the ways that we go to market and approach clients about the opportunities we have to help them close the gaps on their performance metrics, all those things are always going to change uh, based on what modes they use to gather information, like where are they getting their feedback on what vendors are top notch these days, where are they showing up at events, like to what extent are they consuming first party versus third party insight, uh, based on where, how, when customers engage. Like you have to stay flexible. But I think that the touchstones around purpose and your reason for being, those stay fixed so that you can have all of the infinite ways of expressing in using the brand identity toolkit.
Yeah, and it feels like there's just like a very specific sort of order of operations that happens, right? And the stuff kind of at the beginning, like who your customer is, number one, what problem you're solving for them, like into your brand purpose, like that has to be really a solid foundation. And if you do that right, you do have some freedom to play and to change up that expression. But if you skip over that stuff and just try to do the experiment, experimenting with different messaging and like who you are and whatever, like it's not, you're not going back to your home base. Like you said, you haven't created that home base yet, which I think is actually might be the challenge that I see a lot of companies facing, is maybe they haven't created or identified that home base just yet. And maybe don't even realize they don't have it, or maybe other people within their organization have different ideas of what that home base is. And makes it really difficult to be creative and to play and to have that infinite expression. But actually like defining that really clearly and going in order, making sure you don't skip those important steps at the beginning, does allow you a lot more of that flexibility. Now I want to ask about like, how do you measure the success of brand? This is a tricky one when you're thinking about like, it's very easy to, and I want to use the words measure and attribute differently, right? You can attribute revenue to certain clicks or touch points or whatever, but there are ways to measure the impact of brand, right? And how do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, first, I subscribe wholeheartedly to the kind of ethos that folks like Chris Walker and Refine Labs are representing, which is that a lot of this stuff has been thought about wrong over time. And in some ways, the cart is ahead of the horse on the attribution question, just because so many software tools are designed to, show results and show results in the positive versus maybe reckon with the reality of where the business and the brand is. So I think you're right to call out. It's a huge, huge, huge difference. In fact, there just isn't a really overlap between how's the brand performing and what's being attributed. So, like questions like, should we, even be measuring leads, right, are bouncing in my head every day. I think the measurement of performance at the end of the day on brand, you can't just go to, well, did it land? Like, did the campaign resonate with the people that we asked, qualitatively, did our execs like it? Did people take pictures of the billboard and like send it to the text stream? You actually need to be empirically driven. And so this is where I think a modern view on brand would actually say, like, let's use analytics and let's use data and have an answer. So first, you measure brand performance through improving awareness. Do more people know about you than used to know about you? 90% of purchases happen through brands that people already know. Only 1 in 10 purchases happens from a company that the first time somebody heard of it is when they're buying it. So you can improve awareness. That's job one. And metrics I look to for awareness are, we talked about surveys. It might sound silly, but it's not. Stated awareness in surveys going up from 30%, 40%, 50%. It's really important to understand in your target market, if you get a statistically representative sample and their awareness is improving by 3, 4, 5, 600 basis points every quarter, every year, you're doing your job on awareness. Also within awareness, like who's beating a path to your door? Like who is showing up at your website? Can you demonstrate increased website traffic attributable to the brand work? Call it website traffic, signups to your email newsletter, subscriptions to your product, any increase in traffic attributable back to the work you did as a brand. And number 3, share of voice. I mean, share of voice is something that's actually relatively easy to measure. with platforms out there like Blue Ocean that do a lot of really interesting share of voice analysis. So what are people saying when you ask them? How many people are beating a path to your door, and how is that changing negatively or positively or over time? And then what's your relative share of voice in the market? That's how I look at awareness, first of all. And the second is engagement, right? So once people are aware of you, like, are they commenting? Are they sharing? Are they giving that stuff to somebody else? Are they making sure other folks in their network, know what you have to say? And then third, don't forget the comms channel, right? So how many press mentions are you getting for your brand? How many third-party partners are talking about you in their events and their content on their website? The PR, analyst relations, comms piece is so inextricably linked to brand, especially in B2B and especially in tech, where the personal brands of a lot of CEOs, a lot of executives are actually an avatar for the strength of the brand itself, right? And we can all name them. We can all name these founder, or even some cases non-founder. Like in our case, our CEO Jennifer Tejada happens to not be a founder, but I think of her as a refounder. That kind of leadership perspective, capturing it, whether it's with somebody like Jim Cramer or speaking at an event, actually is moving the needle on the brand. And ultimately, can you get to business impact? How many customers would tell you, ultimately we felt peace of mind in doing the deal, going back to originally seeing how you framed your story and your narrative for us. So it's a long answer to a short question, but I'd say starts with awareness, goes through to engagement and into the comms and PR and analyst relation channel, and ultimately all the way down to net new revenue.
No, I think that long answer to a short question is important. And I think that actually, I get that question a lot, and I think it's a conversation that happens a lot of like, oh, well, you can't measure brand. How do you measure brand? Like, there's a million ways you can measure brand, and you should be measuring it. And I think what you described are very like easy, very specific metrics that you should be looking at to see the improvement. And there's a lot of ways you can look at those. I don't know, you described speaking at a conference, right? Or an event, or collaborating with a partner on something. And even just looking at a spike of your web traffic, organic, direct traffic to your website that isn't attributed to anything else on a day where something like that's happening, or there's a big campaign around something like that, like you can start to see, oh, these types of campaigns and activities actually do drive more measurable results, and more, whether that's web traffic or whatever the metric is. But there's
and I would encourage every single person in your audience who has the ability to create a website form fill to include a qualitative, open-ended question that says, how did you hear of us? Because undoubtedly, it will often be the case that it's not going to be one of the 6 things in the dropdown, right? It'll be, I was at my neighbor's house. He's somebody I trust, and I heard him talking about Jenn's company. I saw a post on X or on Instagram, and I clicked on a link. I didn't do anything with it for 2 months, but it registered in the back of my head. The importance of the psychology of brand is that it embeds itself in our consciousness in different ways, depending on where we are in our readiness to purchase. And for those of you that follow the B2B category, you're probably familiar with research that says that at any given point, only 10% of the total addressable market, the TAM, is actually actively looking. So 9 out of 10 potential buyers for your market that are going to give you revenue, improve your company's performance, drive your market cap, help you succeed in your career, 9 out of 10 of those people aren't even looking. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean you're not talking to them. That means you need to be talking to them so that when they are ready, they have been conditioned, they have been given context, they have been given insight around who you are. So when people talk about brand not working, that is attributable to a sense of impatience. That like, oh, I ran this ad and I didn't get revenue for it like next week. But the same is true across marketing. Like the same is true in events, right? Like we were just at Dreamforce 6 weeks ago. I think we have one or two like closed deals from Dreamforce. I mean, if anybody said that was a failure, I'd say no. We have these are 6, 9, 12-month cycles that you start
Sure.
in those kinds of areas. And that event, like sure, like we're accelerating deals and getting business done on those days, in downtown San Francisco. But a lot of it is we're laying track for where we need to go with strategic accounts in our top industry verticals and trying to figure out how to make inroads to them. And so it's the same with brand. You have to remember that not everybody is always buying, but people are listening. And if you can continue to tell back to that consistency in the message, and then make sure it's adapting to, hey, if I started paying attention to you 18 months ago and the world changes in terms of available technology, pain points, company strategy, all those kinds of things, you stay agile and you continue to find ways to address those needs. But please, I implore you, in your website form fill, just ask customers where they heard about you from. Undoubtedly, it will give you some really interesting insight around where they're spending time and what's resonating with them.
For sure. Another great tip on the website before people even fill out a contact form is you can do these for a period of time is do a website survey. Have something pop up. What brought you to the site? How did you get here? What are you looking for? Why are you here? Did you find what you were looking for? There's some really interesting insights you can get from people. You won't know who they are, but you don't need to, right? It's different, right?
Different levels of the funnel. Yep.
Exactly. And also, I think having closed one or two deals from Dreamforce 6 weeks later is like a huge win. That sounds amazing. So congrats on that. But thank you so much for coming on the show today and talking about brand. This is such an important topic. And I think one that, our listeners certainly have tons of questions about that. I think you've done an incredible job answering today. So I just can't thank you enough. Thanks for your time and for sharing all your expertise.
Yeah, you're so welcome. And it so happens that today is the day that we relaunched our global website at PagerDuty. So if you haven't beaten a path to its door yet, it's at pagerduty.com. And we just have a whole bunch of stuff we're super proud of in terms of our innovation roadmap that's become realized, and just some interesting ways of framing how we add value to customers in an enterprise context and a business context. And so check that out and you'll start to see what I'm talking about in terms of leading with customer needs and following up with product truth.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Congratulations on the launch. Thanks for taking time away from launch day to talk to us, but that's huge. I'm sure there's months of work that went into that.
Months of work across lots of different outstanding teams, as you know, to get to something like that. So major shout out to those squads. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for listening in to our episode today. I'm going to be back with another episode next week. I'll be joined by GrowGetter's own Director of Content Strategy,